The most shattering sound I've ever experienced wasn't an explosion. It was the sharp, definitive click of the deadbolt on my parents' front door. I was left standing on the porch, a bitter wind whipping icy rain against me. My thin sweater was completely drenched, but the chill that had settled deep in my bones had nothing to do with the weather. My left hand was clutching the small, quaking hand of an 8-year-old boy named Leo. He wasn't mine, not by blood. He was a boy I'd found lost and alone, a child I couldn't bring myself to abandon. My own father, the man who had patiently taught me to ride a bike, had just stared at us with an expression of pure revulsion. "We warned you, Ava," he'd said, his voice as unforgiving as granite. "We don't want your problems here. You picked some stray over your own family." "Dad, please," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "It's just for one night. It's freezing out here." "No," he stated, his face a mask of finality. "Take that kid and go. Don't even think about coming back." And then the door swung shut, the lock turned, the porch light went out, plunging us into near total darkness. Leo glanced up at me, his eyes wide with a fear that tore right through me. "Are they angry with me?" he whispered. I squeezed his hand, my heart a lead weight in my chest. I had no money. I had no place to go. I had just been irrevocably cast out by my own parents. But as I looked down at him, one thing became crystal clear. I would sleep on the cold, hard pavement before I ever let this little boy down. Before we get into the rest of this story, do me a quick favor and hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. To really get why I was stranded in that storm, you need to know that my life didn't just fall apart in one go. It was a slow, creeping rot, like a tiny hole in the hull of a ship that you don't even notice until you're standing in water up to your ankles. It all began with Mark. I was married to Mark Peterson for 6 years. I genuinely believed we were happy, that we were a team building a future. I've always been a simple person. I never needed lavish vacations or expensive jewelry. All I ever wanted was a home, a partnership, a feeling of security. I worked as a receptionist at a local vet clinic, and I made sure his favorite meal was ready when he got home at 6:30. I pressed his work shirts. I was his sounding board for every complaint about his job. I made my world revolve around his, making myself smaller so he could feel bigger, but it was never going to be enough. One Thursday evening, Mark came home later than usual. He didn't greet me with a kiss. He didn't even ask how my day was. He just walked straight into the kitchen, poured a tall glass of water, and announced, "I'm leaving you, Ava." I froze mid-stir, a pot of chili simmering on the stove. I remember staring at the dark red bubbling away and feeling the entire world grind to a halt. "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "I mean, I'm done with this," he said, not with sadness, but with an air of profound irritation. "I'm bored, Ava. You're boring. I found someone else. She has drive. She has passion. You just kind of exist." He had a suitcase packed that very night. By the next morning, our joint savings account was completely empty. He left me with the lease, a mountain of bills, and a heart shattered into a million pieces. I did what any daughter in crisis would do. I called my parents. My father, Richard, and my mother, Helen, lived in a pristine house in a gated community. They were deeply invested in that house, in their perfectly manicured garden, their brand new SUV, and most of all, in what the neighbors thought of them. They were not, however, very invested in messy emotions. When I tearfully told my mother that Mark had left me, the phone line went silent for a long, heavy moment. "Well," she said finally, her tone clinical, "what did you do to push him away?" It felt like a physical blow. Mom, he had an affair. He took all our money. Men don't just walk out for no reason, Ava, she retorted sharply. You probably stopped taking care of yourself. You probably whined too much. This is just humiliating. What am I supposed to tell my book club? That my daughter's a failure? They didn't offer to help with the rent. They didn't ask if I was holding it together. They just told me to handle it. But there was nothing to handle. Mark was gone. The landlord served me an eviction notice, giving me 30 days to clear out since I couldn't possibly cover the rent on my own. I ended up sleeping in my old hatchback, showering at a 24-hour gym, desperately trying to hold on to my job. But the weight of it all was crushing me. I could barely eat. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Then came the day it all came crashing down. I had a severe panic attack right there at the clinic's front desk. My chest seized up and I couldn't catch my breath. My boss, Dr. Miller, sent me to the emergency room just to be safe. I sat in that sterile, impersonal waiting room for what felt like an eternity. The doctors eventually told me I was physically fine, just overwhelmed with stress. They handed me a bill I had no way of paying and sent me on my way. But I didn't leave right away. I slumped back into one of the hard plastic chairs, trying to figure out where I could possibly sleep that night. It had started to rain, and through the glass doors I felt completely invisible. That's when I saw him. He was just a few seats down from me, a small boy looking to be about 8 years old. He was swimming in a dirty blue t-shirt and had a noticeable tear in the knee of his jeans. He was just swinging his legs, his gaze fixed on the linoleum floor. I observed him for at least 20 minutes. No one approached him. No parent came to sit beside him. Staff bustled past with their charts and equipment, and other patients shuffled by. He was like a little ghost. "Excuse me," I asked a passing nurse. "Is anyone with that child?" She gave him a tired glance. "I think his mother's with a doctor, or maybe his dad. He's been there for a while." She just kept walking. Another hour crawled by. The waiting room began to thin out as the evening wore on. The boy hadn't budged. He hadn't asked for a drink. He hadn't made a sound. He just sat there, clutching a little green plastic army man in his fist. I moved a seat closer to him. "Hey," I said gently. He flinched and looked up at me with these enormous dark eyes. They were the most desolate eyes I had ever seen. They weren't the eyes of a child who was simply bored. They were the eyes of a child bracing for the next bad thing to happen. "Are you all right?" I asked. He didn't reply, just glanced toward the main entrance and then back at me. "Where are your parents?" I tried again. He just shook his head. "You don't know?" He shook his head again. My heart began to pound. The logical thing to do was to find security or a social worker, but as I looked at him, I saw a reflection of myself. I saw someone waiting for a single person to show they cared, and it was clear that no one was coming. "Are you hungry?" I asked. He gave a slow, hesitant nod. I had a single protein bar in my purse. It was supposed to be my dinner, but I pulled it out and offered it to him. He took it with hands that were visibly trembling. He tore open the wrapper and devoured it in what felt like 3 seconds. He was famished. "What's your name?" I asked. He swallowed. "Leo." "Hi, Leo, I'm Ava. How long have you been sitting here?" He shrugged. "Since it was light outside." It was now 9 o'clock at night. "Who brought you here?" "A man," he whispered. "Your dad." "No." "Where did the man go?" "He told me to wait here. He said if I moved, he'd be angry." A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't just a child who had wandered off. This was a boy who had been deliberately left behind, dumped. I went up to the main reception desk. "Excuse me," I said to the woman behind the glass. "This boy, Leo, has been here all day. Can you tell me who he came in with?" The woman typed on her keyboard for a moment, a frown creasing her brow. "We have no record for a Leo. Are you sure he wasn't with you?" "No," I said, my voice firm. "He's by himself." The receptionist let out a weary sigh. "Look, if he's been abandoned, we have to call CPS and the police. They'll come get him. It could take a few hours. They'll likely take him to a temporary holding center for the night." I glanced back at Leo. He was watching our exchange, his face a mask of terror. He heard the word police and physically recoiled, trying to make himself smaller in the chair. He looked like he wanted to vanish into thin air. I knew what the system was like. I knew what happened to kids who got lost in the shuffle, especially late at night in a big city. He'd be processed, questioned, and scared. He'd become just another case file. And I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that he needed me. And God help me, I needed him. I needed a reason. I needed someone to protect. I walked back over to him. "Leo," I said, crouching down to his level, "do you want to stay here and wait for the police?" His eyes immediately welled up with tears. "No," he whispered. "Please, no police. Do you have anywhere else you can go?" He shook his head. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel so alone. For the next 2 weeks, Leo and I were like fugitives in my own city. I still had my car, and I had a little bit of cash from my final paycheck. We found a rundown motel on the far edge of town. The room reeked of stale smoke and dampness, but it had a lock on the door and a small television that got a few channels. Leo was an enigma. He was the most reserved child I'd ever encountered. He didn't run or jump on the beds. He didn't ask for toys or snacks. He would just sit on the edge of the mattress, his hands folded neatly in his lap, as if waiting for his next command. It was heartbreaking. It told me he was conditioned to be invisible, to stay out of the way. "You can watch cartoons if you want," I told him that first night. He looked at the remote control as if it were a strange foreign object. "Is that okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "It's okay." He turned on the TV, but kept the volume so low I could barely make out the sound. We fell into a fragile routine. I had to take him with me to the vet clinic. I told Dr. Miller that my nephew was visiting unexpectedly, and his sitter had bailed. Dr. Miller was a grumpy old man, but he begrudgingly let Leo sit in the small break room. Leo would sit there for my entire 8-hour shift with a coloring book I'd bought him at the dollar store. He never made a peep. He never caused a single problem. At night, back in the grimy motel room, I would gently try to get him to talk. I had to know where he came from. I needed to know about his parents so I could either find them or understand who I was shielding him from. "Leo," I said one evening as we were eating instant soup, "do you remember your last name?" He chewed thoughtfully. "No," he said quietly. "Do you remember your mom?" He shook his head. "No, Mom." "You never had a mom?" "I don't remember her." "What about your dad?" He stopped eating, his spoon hovering in the air. A strange expression clouded his face. It wasn't just sadness, it was fear, but with something else mixed in, like a distorted memory trying to surface. He was busy," Leo said. "Always busy. Always on the phone. In the car." "What kind of car?" "A black one," Leo said. "A big black one. The doors opened by themselves." I frowned. That sounded like a luxury vehicle. "Did he drive it?" "No," Leo said. "Robert drove it." "Who's Robert?" "The driver." "Did you call your dad, Dad?" Leo looked down at his soup. "Sometimes. But usually I had to call him Sir." "Sir?" I repeated. "Yes, when he was working, and he was always working." None of it added up. If his father was wealthy enough to have a private driver and a car with automatic doors, Why was Leo dressed in rags? Why was he unceremoniously dumped at a hospital? Why wasn't his face plastered all over the news? I obsessively checked the news on my phone every night, searching for missing boy or lost child. Nothing. It was as if he'd simply materialized out of nowhere. But his nightmares told a darker story. Almost every night, around 2 or 3 a.m., Leo would start screaming. It wasn't a child's cry. It was a raw, terrifying shriek that jolted me from sleep. I'd rush to his side to find him thrashing in the cheap motel sheets, fighting something I couldn't see. "No!" he would yell. "Let me out! It's too dark! It's too dark in there!" I'd hold him, rocking him gently. "It's okay, Leo. I'm here. Ava is here." He'd wake up drenched in sweat, shaking uncontrollably. He would cling to me, his small fingers digging into my arms. "Don't let them take me," he'd sob. "Don't let them put me in the closet." "I won't," I promised him, my voice thick. "I will never let anyone take you." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. Over those 2 weeks, I fell completely in love with him. Not in a strange way, but in the fierce, protective way a mother loves her child. I had wanted children with Mark. We'd tried for years, but it just never happened. And now here was this broken little boy who needed me, and I felt a fire ignite in my soul. He gave me a purpose, but love doesn't pay the rent. My old car finally gave out. The cost to repair it was more money than I had in the world. I started being late for work. After the 3rd day in a row, Dr. Miller let me go. "I can't run a daycare, Ava," he'd said, not unkindly. "And I can't have a kid in the break room. It's a liability." I was jobless. 2 days after that, the last of my money was gone. We couldn't pay for the motel. The manager told us to pack our things and get out. I had no one left to call. I had exhausted my savings. I had no husband, no job. There was only one option left: my parents. I knew they were furious with me. I knew they held me responsible for the failure of my marriage. But I thought, maybe if they saw a child, a small, helpless child, their hearts would soften. They went to church every Sunday. They wrote checks to charities. Surely they would let us sleep in their guest room for just a couple of nights while I got back on my feet. I used the last of my car's battery to get it to their neighborhood, parking it down the block because I knew how much my father hated the idea of an oil stain on his pristine driveway. It was raining. Of course it was raining. I took Leo's hand. "We're going to see my mom and dad," I told him, trying to force a smile. "They have a big house. Maybe they'll have cookies." Leo looked up at their house, his eyes full of apprehension. "Are they nice?" They can be," I lied. We walked up the long paved driveway. The windows of the house were all lit up, casting a warm golden glow. I could see the flicker of the television inside. It looked like a picture of a perfect life, a life I used to know. I rang the bell. My mother opened the door. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and holding a glass of white wine. She looked at me, drenched and disheveled. Then her eyes fell on Leo. Her face hardened. "Ava," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "What is this?" "Mom, please," I begged. "I lost my job. I have nowhere to go. This is Leo. I'm looking after him. We just need a place to stay." My father appeared in the doorway behind her, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked at Leo the way you'd look at a piece of garbage that had blown onto the lawn. "Who's the boy?" my father demanded. "He's a friend," I stammered. "He needed help. We both do." "You brought a strange child to our home?" my mother hissed, her voice rising. "Are you out of your mind, Ava? Is this why Mark left you? Because you do things like this?" "He's homeless, Mom. He's just a child." "And you're acting like one," my father cut in. We told you, Ava. You made your bed when you let your marriage fall apart. We are not operating a homeless shelter for your poor life choices. I'm your daughter, I cried, the rain and tears mixing on my cheeks. I'm begging you, just for tonight. Let us sleep on the floor. It's so cold. My father stepped forward, his frame filling the doorway. Leo instinctively hid behind my leg. No, my father said, his voice cold and final. We don't want your mess here. You chose this stray over your own family. You're an embarrassment to us. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of any warmth. Take that kid and leave, he commanded. Don't come back until you've sorted out your life. He reached for the door. Dad, wait! The slam of the door echoed in the quiet street. The lock clicked, and we were alone in the darkness. The rain intensified, coming down in sheets. I looked down at Leo. He wasn't crying, just shivering uncontrollably. He looked up at me with those huge, sad eyes. Are they angry with me? He whispered. I dropped to my knees on the wet porch and pulled him into a hug. I held him so tightly, hoping my own body heat could somehow warm him. No, Leo, I sobbed. They're not mad at you. They're broken. I held him for a moment longer, then took a deep breath. But I've got you, I said, my voice shaking with a new resolve. I promise I've got you. I stood up, wiped the rain from my face, and took his hand. Come on, I said. Where are we going? He asked. I don't know, I admitted, but we're not staying here. We walked away from that beautiful house with its warm, inviting lights. We walked down the dark, empty street. I had no money, no home, and no family, except for the little boy whose hand was now firmly in mine. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would go to war with the entire world for him. The first night after my parents cast us out was the longest of my life. We ended up back in my dead car, which was parked a few streets away from my childhood home, bathed in the sickly orange glow of a street lamp. It was freezing inside the car, the cold seeping through the metal. I draped my jacket over Leo, who was curled up in a tight ball on the back seat. I sat in the driver's seat, watching the rain streak down the windshield. I didn't sleep a wink. Every time a car's headlights swept past, my heart leaped into my throat. I was terrified it was the police coming to arrest me for vagrancy, for having a child who wasn't mine living in a car. The next morning, the engine wouldn't even turn over, just a pathetic clicking sound. The battery was completely dead. I had no way to fix it, no money for a tow. I glanced at the fuel gauge. Empty. Is the car sick? Leo asked from the back, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Yeah, I said, forcing a cheerful tone. It's just really tired. We're going to have to walk for a bit. We gathered our few belongings into a couple of plastic shopping bags. I had a change of clothes, my toothbrush, and the last of the protein bars. Leo had his little green army man. Leaving the car behind felt like severing the final tie to my old life. Now, we were officially on the street. We headed downtown, where I knew the shelters were located. I naively thought you could just walk in and they'd give you a warm bed. I was so wrong. The first shelter we found was a grim brick building with a line of people snaking all the way around the block. Men with overflowing shopping carts, women trying to soothe crying infants. I held Leo's hand tightly. When we finally reached the front, a woman behind a thick pane of glass just shook her head. "Full up," she said flatly. "Please," I begged. "I have a child with me." "So does everyone else, honey," she said, her eyes already looking past me. "Try the mission over on 8th Avenue. We walked to 8th Avenue, full. We tried a church that ran an overnight program 5 blocks away, full. By early evening, my feet were covered in blisters. Leo was exhausted, his little legs barely able to keep up. He never complained, but I could see the weariness in his face. "I'm hungry, Ava," he whispered. I checked my pocket. I had $6 and some loose change. "Okay," I said. "Let's go get some dinner." We found a burger joint, and I bought 2 items off the dollar menu and 1 small order of fries to share. We sat in a booth in the far back corner. The warmth and the smell of fried food felt like an incredible luxury. For a few minutes, we were just a normal pair having a meal. But then a security guard came over. He glanced at our plastic bags, at our rumpled clothes. "You can't just sit here," he said gruffly. "If you're done, you need to leave." "We're just finishing," I said quickly. We scarfed down the rest of our food and headed back out into the biting wind. That night, we found shelter in the city's main bus terminal. It was noisy, with automated announcements echoing through the hall every few minutes. "Bus to Philadelphia, now boarding at Gate 7. People were rushing in every direction, but it was indoors and there were benches. I found one tucked away in a corner, far from the main entrance. I sat down and pulled Leo onto my lap. "Try to get some sleep," I whispered. He burrowed his face into my shoulder. "I don't like it here, Ava." "I know, buddy. It's just for tonight." I wrapped my arms around him, determined to stay awake and watch over him. I had to be his protector. Around 1 a.m., a woman with a clipboard and an official-looking badge walked by. She stopped when she saw us. Her eyes lingered on Leo, then shifted to me. My heart began to pound. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was gentle, but her gaze was sharp. "Is this your son?" I panicked. If I said yes, she might ask for proof I couldn't provide. If I said no, she'd take him away on the spot. "Yes," I lied. "We're just waiting for our bus. My husband's in the restroom." She looked at our bags, her expression unconvinced. "How old is he?" 8. "He should be in a warm bed," she said. "If you're having trouble, there are resources available." "We're fine," I cut her off. "Our bus leaves in 10 minutes, thanks." She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to press the issue. Finally, she gave a slight nod. "All right, be safe." She walked away, but I saw her pull out her phone and start talking. A wave of pure terror washed over me. She was calling someone, the police or Child Protective Services. "Leo," I whispered urgently, "wake up." "What?" he mumbled. "We have to go, now." I grabbed our bags, pulled him to his feet, and we hurried out a side exit into a dark alley. We ran for 3 solid blocks without looking back. We ended up taking refuge under a massive concrete overpass. The air was thick with the smell of damp and garbage. Other people were there, wrapped in blankets and cardboard boxes. It was terrifying, but we were hidden. I found a relatively dry spot behind a large support pillar. I sat down on the cold ground and pulled Leo back into my lap. He was shivering violently. "I want to go home," he cried softly into my jacket. "I want my own bed." "I know," I said, tears streaming down my own face. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry." I felt like a complete and utter failure. I had promised to protect him, and now he was sleeping under a bridge. I was dragging him down into my own personal hell. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I should just let them take him. Maybe he would be better off in the system with a warm bed and regular meals. But then I remembered his nightmares, the way he screamed about being locked in the dark. If I gave him up, he'd be all alone again, just another number. No, I couldn't do it. We were a team, a broken, homeless, and hungry team, but we had each other. 3 more days passed in a blur. We became ghosts in our own city, learning the art of invisibility. We spent our days at the public library, where it was warm and quiet. We washed up in the public restrooms at the park. We survived on whatever I could afford, with the loose change I found on sidewalks, or the few dollars people gave me when I forced myself to beg. I never imagined I'd be in that position, but when you're responsible for a hungry child, your pride evaporates. On the fourth evening, another cold rain began to fall. We were huddled under the awning of a closed-down bakery, sitting on a piece of cardboard I'd pulled from a dumpster. Leo was quietly eating a stale croissant that a kind worker had given us. The streetlights shimmered on the wet asphalt. A sleek black town car drove by, its tires sending a spray of water onto the sidewalk near us. Leo suddenly stopped chewing. He watched the car intently as it moved down the street. His eyes were wide. "Leo?" I asked. He didn't seem to hear me. He just stared at the car's red taillights until they vanished around a corner. Then he turned to me, his face pale in the dim light. "Ava," he whispered. "What is it, buddy?" He swallowed hard and looked around, as if to make sure no one was listening. He leaned in so close his words were a breath against my ear. "My dad is a billionaire," he said. I almost laughed. It sounded like something a kid would make up to escape a grim reality, like saying your dad is a superhero. "Oh, Leo," I said gently, "you don't have to make up stories for me. It's okay." "No." He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly firm. "I remember, that car, it looked like his car." "Leo, his name is Croft," Leo said, the name tumbling out of him as if it had been stuck for years. "I remember now. People called him Mr. Croft, and I don't think my name is Leo." I froze. The conviction in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a child playing a game. This was a child unearthing a trauma. "Croft," I repeated slowly. What do you think your name is?" He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing the heel of his hand against his forehead, as if trying to physically dislodge the memory. "I don't know, but he's really rich. He has a big tower, a huge building with his name on it." A big tower. Croft. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. There was a Croft Tower downtown. It was an iconic part of the city skyline, the headquarters of Croft Industries. Edward Croft was one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the country. But it was impossible. Edward Croft didn't have a missing son. If a billionaire's son vanished, it would be the biggest news story in the world. "Leo, are you sure?" "Yes," he whispered, his eyes pleading with me. "Please, you have to believe me." I looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the grime and the matted hair, he had a certain refined bone structure, a look in his eyes that seemed out of place. "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible. "Okay, I believe you. We'll find out." We waited for morning. The second the public library opened its doors at 9, we were the first ones inside. I hurried us over to the computer bank, praying my old library card still worked. It did. I had 1 hour of internet access. I sat Leo down in the chair beside me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I entered Edward Croft family into the search bar. The results were instantaneous. Photos of a handsome, severe-looking man in expensive suits. Articles about his business empire. Pictures from charity galas. "Is that him?" I asked, pointing to the screen. Leo gasped. He reached out and touched the monitor with a small, dirty finger. "That's him. That's my dad." I felt the blood rush from my head. I clicked on a new search. Edward Croft Children. And then I saw it. A news headline from 2 years ago. Billionaire Edward Croft's son abducted. Julian Croft, age 6, missing. I clicked on the article. A school photo loaded. It showed a little boy with neatly combed hair and a bright red sweater, a shy smile on his face. I stared at the screen. Then I looked at the boy next to me. The hair was different, the face thinner, the clothes ragged, but the eyes were identical. The shape of his nose, the small mole just above his left eyebrow. It was him. "Leo," I breathed. "You're Julian." He stared at the photograph on the screen, his own eyes filling with tears. "That's me," he whispered. "That's my sweater. I loved that sweater." I scanned the article. Julian Croft had been taken from a city park 2 years prior. The investigation had gone cold. He was widely presumed to be dead. Edward Croft had posted a $5 million reward, but it had never been claimed. I leaned back in the creaky library chair, my mind screaming. I was sitting next to the most famous missing child in the country. "Why?" I stammered. "Why did you say your name was Leo?" "The bad man told me to," he said, his voice trembling. "The man who took me. He said my name was Leo now. He said if I ever told anyone my real name, he would hurt my dad." "Oh, God. Is my dad okay?" he asked, his voice small. "Is he alive?" "Yes," I said, scrolling through recent articles. "He's alive. He's been looking for you." I glanced at the timer on the computer screen. We had 10 minutes left. I had to make a choice. The sensible thing was to go to the police, walk into the nearest precinct, and tell them I'd found Julian Croft. But then I remembered the woman at the bus station, the way the word police had made him shrink in terror. If I went to the police, I'd be their first suspect. They would think I was involved. They would separate us immediately. They would put him in a sterile room and grill him for hours. He was terrified of being locked away, and Edward Croft, a man that powerful, would have layers of security. If I just called his office, they'd dismiss me as a crank. They must get dozens of fake calls a day. No, I couldn't risk it. I couldn't let Julian be re-traumatized. I turned to him and took his small face in my hands. "Julian," I said. His real name felt foreign on my tongue. "Do you trust me?" He nodded without hesitation. "Yes." "We're going to go see your dad," I said. "Not the police. Your dad." "We're going to walk right up to his front door." "To the tower?" he asked. "To the tower." I stood up, feeling a strange jolt of adrenaline. I was still homeless, still broke, still wearing clothes I'd slept in for days. But I had the truth, and right then the truth felt like the most powerful weapon on earth. "Come on," I said, taking his hand. "Let's go home." Croft Tower was a monument of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. It was the tallest, most intimidating building in the city. It screamed money, power, and impenetrability. I stood on the sidewalk across the street with Julian, holding his hand. We must have looked like a bad joke. My hair was a mess, my clothes were stained, and Julian looked like a little street urchin. Business people in sharp suits hurried past, giving us a wide, disdainful berth. They saw us as nothing more than beggars. "Are you ready?" I asked Julian. He was trembling, staring up at the massive building. "I remember the revolving door," he whispered. "We used to race through it." "Okay," I said, my resolve hardening. "Let's go through the revolving door." I took a deep breath and marched us toward the grand entrance. A doorman in a crisp uniform immediately stepped into our path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice polite but firm. "There's no loitering here." I didn't break my stride. I looked him dead in the eye. "I'm not loitering. I have an appointment with Edward Croft." The doorman let out a short, condescending laugh. "Mr. Croft doesn't see... well, he doesn't see anyone without being scheduled months in advance. Please move along before I have to call security." "Call them," I said, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't feel. "Call security. Call Mr. Croft. Call every news station in the city." The doorman's smirk faltered. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged by someone who looked like me. "I have his son," I said loudly. A few people in the opulent lobby slowed their pace, turning to look. The doorman's face went rigid. "What did you just say?" "I have Julian Croft," I declared, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "I am standing right here with Julian Croft, and I need to see his father, now." The doorman's eyes dropped to Julian, and Julian wasn't cowering anymore. He was looking around the lobby with an expression of dawning recognition. He pointed a small, grubby finger toward a massive, swirling blue sculpture in the center of the atrium. "That's the spinny blue thing," he said, his voice clear. "I used to hide behind it when we played." The color drained from the doorman's face. He raised a hand to his earpiece. "Control, we have a situation at the main entrance. Code red." In an instant, 3 large security guards in black suits materialized, surrounding us. They didn't touch us, but their presence was a solid wall. "Come with us," one of them said, his voice flat. They led us to a small, windowless office and gestured for us to sit on a leather sofa. "If this is some kind of hoax," the head guard said, his eyes cold, "you will be spending a very long time in prison." "It's not a hoax," I said, my arm wrapped around Julian. "Just get his father." We waited for what felt like a lifetime. The silence in the room was suffocating. Julian was swinging his legs, a nervous energy buzzing around him. He knew he was close. Then, the door burst open. A man strode in, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. He looked just like the photos online, but older and etched with a profound weariness. His face was a mask of grief. It was Edward Croft. He paused in the doorway, his gaze landing on me first. His eyes were like chips of ice, full of suspicion as they scanned my dirty clothes. He looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. Then his eyes moved to the boy sitting next to me. The entire atmosphere in the room changed. Edward Croft stopped breathing. He took a single faltering step forward. "Julian?" he whispered, the name a broken, fragile thing. Julian slid off the sofa and stood up. He looked at the powerful man. "Dad," he said. Edward Croft's knees buckled. He collapsed to the floor, not caring about his $1,000 suit. He threw his arms wide, and Julian ran into his embrace. They collided, and Edward buried his face in his son's messy hair. He began to sob, deep, guttural sobs that came from a place of unimaginable pain, the sound of a father who had been living in hell for 2 years. He clutched the boy as if he might evaporate. "I've got you," he choked out between sobs. "I've got you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I sat on the sofa, silent tears streaming down my own filthy face. This was it. This was the moment I had risked everything for. I had done the right thing. After a long time, Edward pulled back, his hands roaming over Julian's face, his hair, his arms, as if to confirm he was real. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice ragged. "Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay," Julian said. He pointed at me. "Ava took care of me." Edward Croft went still. He slowly turned his head, and the raw emotion in his eyes was replaced by a chilling coldness. He stood up, pulling Julian behind him, using his own body as a shield. He was looking at me as if I was the monster. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I'm Ava," I said, my voice trembling. "I found him." "Found him?" Edward interrupted with a sharp, bitter laugh. "Or took him." "I found him at the hospital," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He was abandoned. I looked after him. I brought him back to you." "You expect me to believe that story? My son disappears for 2 years, and then a homeless woman just happens to walk into my building with him? How much do you want? I stared at him, bewildered. What? The reward! He spat, his face twisted with contempt. That's what this is about, isn't it? The $5 million. No! I don't want your money. I just wanted him to be safe. Dad, no! Julian cried out, pulling on his father's sleeve. Ava is my friend. She saved me. She's a liar, Julian, Edward said firmly. She manipulated you. At that moment, two of the guards grabbed my arms, their grips like iron. They started to drag me toward the door. I didn't hurt him, I screamed, struggling against them. I love him. Please, just let me say goodbye. Get her out of my sight, Edward roared. The last thing I saw was Julian's terrified face, his small hand reaching out for me as his father held him back. Ava, he screamed. Then the door slammed shut. They didn't let me go. I was held in a security office until the police arrived. The next 12 hours were a nightmare of interrogation rooms and the blinding flash of a mugshot camera. I was no longer a good Samaritan. I was the prime suspect. They questioned me for hours. Where did you find him? Why didn't you call us right away? Did you know who he was? I told them the truth, over and over again. I told them about the hospital, the bus station, my fear that the system would terrify him even more. They had to release me eventually. There was no evidence to charge me with kidnapping, not yet. The hospital's security footage corroborated my story of finding him alone, but they were deeply suspicious. Don't leave town, the lead detective warned me as I left. We'll be watching you. I walked out of the police station and into a media frenzy. News vans lined the street. Reporters swarmed me the moment I stepped outside, shoving microphones and cameras in my face. Did you kidnap him? Were you trying to extort the family? What did you do to him for 2 years? I put my head down and just ran. I ran until I couldn't breathe. I found a seedy motel on the outskirts of town that took cash and locked myself inside. I turned on the television, and my own face stared back at me. They had dug up my entire life. They knew about the divorce, the lost job, my parents disowning me. A news anchor with a severe expression was saying, sources claim Ava Miller, a destitute and unstable divorcee, held the billionaire's heir for weeks, possibly planning a ransom demand. Edward Croft has released a statement thanking law enforcement and vowing to seek justice against the woman who held his son captive. I was the villain, the crazy homeless lady who had preyed on a vulnerable child. No one mentioned that I had fed him when I myself was starving, that I had held him through his night terrors. I sank onto the edge of the lumpy mattress and just cried. I had tried to do the right thing, and it had utterly destroyed me. Then there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped. Who is it? Room service, a man's voice called out. I hadn't ordered anything. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. My blood ran cold. It was Mark, my ex-husband. I opened the door, just a crack. What are you doing here? Mark pushed the door open and sauntered in. He looked polished and successful in a tailored jacket. He looked like the man who had ruined my life. Wow, he said, looking around the grimy room with a smirk. You've really let yourself go, haven't you, Ava? Get out, I said. He chuckled. Is that any way to talk to your husband? Ex-husband. Technically, the divorce isn't finalized, he said, sitting down as if he owned the place. I saw you on the news. You're a star. I didn't do anything wrong. Doesn't matter, Mark said breezily. The court of public opinion has found you guilty. But I know you, Ava. You're not clever enough to mastermind a kidnapping. You just stumbled onto him, right? What do you want, Mark? His smile vanished. He leaned forward, his expression turning predatory. I want my cut, he said. Cut of what? The money, he whispered. The $5 million. You found the kid. That reward money is marital property. It belongs to us." "There is no money," I shouted. "He thinks I kidnapped his son. He hates me." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Well, that's a problem, but it's one we can solve. I can be your white knight. I'll go to the press, tell them what a wonderful, kind-hearted person you are. We'll sell your story, paint you as a saint. We'll create public pressure, sue Croft for the reward." "You're despicable," I said, disgusted. "I don't want his money. I just want to know that Julian is okay." Mark stood up and walked toward me, cornering me against the wall. I could smell his expensive cologne, the same scent that now made me feel sick. "Listen to me," he hissed. "You're going to play along, because if you don't, I'll go straight to the police. I'll tell them you were talking about kidnapping a rich kid for months. I'll invent a whole story. I will make sure you rot in a prison cell." I stared at him, at the monster I had once loved. "Get out," I whispered. "Think about it, Ava," Mark said, heading for the door. "You have nothing. I'm your only way out of this." He left, slamming the door behind him. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, a public defender appointed to my case. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice weary, "Edward Croft has filed for an emergency restraining order against you, and a custody hearing is scheduled for Friday morning." "Custody?" I asked, confused. "But he's the father." "Yes," the lawyer explained, "but because of the circumstances of the abduction, the state is involved. A judge has to officially sign off on the placement, and Ms. Miller, the judge has requested your presence." "Why?" "Because the boy won't stop asking for you." My heart both shattered and soared. He still needed me. "I'll be there," I said. "Be prepared," the lawyer warned. "Croft has the best legal team money can buy. They're going to try to paint you as an unstable, dangerous person. They're going to try to erase you from that boy's life for good." I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. I looked exhausted and broken, but then I remembered the feeling of Julian's small hand in mine. I remembered him whispering that I was his friend. Edward Croft had his billions, his lawyers, and the media on his side. I had absolutely nothing, but I was going to walk into that courtroom, and I was going to fight for my boy. The morning of the hearing, I was a bundle of nerves. I was waiting in the lobby of the motel for my lawyer to pick me up, but it wasn't him who walked through the door. It was a detective, Detective Ben Carter. He was the only officer who had looked at me with something other than contempt during the interrogation. He looked exhausted. He was carrying a thick file. He walked right over to me and sat down. "Ms. Miller," he said, "we need to talk." "Am I being arrested again?" I asked, my hands starting to tremble. "I swear I didn't take him." "I know you didn't," he said quietly. I stopped breathing. "You know?" "New evidence came to light," Carter said, opening the file. He slid a grainy security photo across the table. It showed a dark sedan pulling away from the hospital on the day I found Julian. "Recognize this car?" he asked. I looked closer. It was a dark gray sedan with a very specific dent in the passenger side door. My stomach lurched. I knew that dent. I was in the car when it happened. "That's Mark's car," I whispered. "That's my ex-husband's car." Carter nodded grimly. "We ran the plate. We also found a witness who saw a man matching Mark Peterson's description leaving a child at the ER entrance that day." "Mark, it made no sense. But why?" "We brought him in for questioning this morning," Carter said. "He confessed to everything." The room started to spin. Confessed to what? "Mark wasn't the original kidnapper," Carter explained. "Julian had wandered away from the park 2 years ago, got lost, and ended up on the streets, bouncing between shelters and living in the cracks. But 3 weeks ago, Mark found him panhandling. He recognized the boy from the old news reports. He knew exactly who he was. I felt bile rise in my throat. He knew he was the Croft heir, Carter confirmed. Mark took him. He held him in the basement of a vacant property he was managing. His plan was to contact Edward Croft and demand a ransom. I covered my mouth with my hand. Oh my God. But Mark got spooked, Carter continued. He thought the police were closing in, so he panicked. He couldn't risk getting caught with the boy. So he drove him to the hospital, dumped him in the lobby, and took off. He figured if Julian was found by the system, it would never be traced back to him. And then I found him, I whispered. Yes, Carter said, his eyes filled with a new understanding. You found him. You saved his life. I thought about Mark in my motel room, trying to blackmail me into suing for the reward. He wasn't just being greedy. He was trying to control the situation to make sure I never figured out he was the one who had abandoned Julian there in the first place. Where is Mark now? I asked. In custody, Carter said. He's facing a long list of federal charges. He's going to be put away for a very, very long time. I leaned back, a huge weight lifting from my shoulders, only to be replaced by a hot, searing anger. The man I had shared a life with, the man I had loved, was a monster. He had used a terrified child as a pawn in a get-rich-quick scheme. Does Edward Croft know? I asked. Not yet, Carter said, closing the folder. I'm heading to the courthouse now to brief the DA. You should come with me, Ava. This changes everything. The courtroom was a circus. Reporters and spectators packed the gallery, all eager to see the homeless kidnapper face the billionaire. I walked in with my lawyer, wearing a simple but clean blouse he had bought for me. I tried to keep my head up, but I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. Edward Croft was at the plaintiff's table, looking powerful and immovable. He refused to even look in my direction. The judge, a woman named Maria Sanchez, banged her gavel. This hearing will determine the custodial placement of the minor, Julian Croft, she announced. Edward's lawyer, a man who looked like a shark in a suit, rose to his feet. Your Honor, he began, the facts are straightforward. Mr. Croft is the boy's biological father. He has the resources, the home, and the unwavering desire to care for his son. The respondent, Ms. Miller, is an unemployed, transient woman with no legal or biological ties to the child. She held him for weeks, demonstrating profound instability. We ask for sole custody and a permanent restraining order. I felt myself shrink in my chair. He made me sound like a monster. My lawyer stood. Your Honor, Ms. Miller saved this child's life. She was acting out of a genuine, if misguided, fear for his safety in the foster care system. She acted illegally, Edward's lawyer shot back. Enough, Judge Sanchez commanded. She looked directly at me. Ms. Miller, why did you not contact the police? I stood, my legs shaking. Because he was terrified, Your Honor. He has nightmares about being locked in a dark place. I couldn't bear the thought of him being put in a holding cell with strangers. I just wanted to get him to his father safely. Edward let out a loud, derisive scoff. You wanted a payday. Mr. Croft, the judge warned. Just then, the courtroom doors opened and Detective Carter walked in. He went directly to the prosecutor's table and whispered urgently in the man's ear, handing him a document. The prosecutor's eyes widened. He shot to his feet. Your Honor, he said, his voice booming, we have new critical information regarding this case. What is it? Judge Sanchez asked. We have arrested Mark Peterson, Ms. Miller's ex-husband, for the abduction and abandonment of Julian Croft. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Edward Croft spun around in his chair, his face a mask of shock. Mr. Peterson confessed to holding the boy and then dumping him at the hospital, the prosecutor continued. Ms. Miller found him minutes later. She had no prior knowledge of her ex-husband's actions. In fact, it appears she was another one of his victims. The room fell silent. Edward Croft turned and looked at me. For the first time, his eyes weren't filled with ice. They were filled with confusion and something else, the dawn of a terrible realization. He was starting to understand. I wasn't the villain. I was just the person who had cleaned up the villain's mess. Is this true? Edward asked, his voice cracking, forgetting all courtroom protocol. Yes, I said quietly. I didn't know. I just found a little boy who was scared. The judge reviewed the papers Detective Carter had provided. She was quiet for a long time. Then she looked at Edward. Mr. Croft, she said, your son is waiting in my chambers with a therapist. I spoke with him before this hearing began. Do you know what he asked me? Edward shook his head, looking lost. He didn't ask for toys or about your mansion, the judge said. He asked me if Ava was going to be okay. He told me, and I quote, Ava is my safe place. Edward looked down at the polished table, and I saw his hand begin to tremble. The law is clear, Judge Sanchez said. Mr. Croft, as the biological father, you are hereby granted full legal custody. My heart broke. Even though I knew it was coming, it felt like a physical blow. Silent tears began to trace paths down my cheeks. However, the judge continued, her voice firm, this court also recognizes the profound and essential bond that has formed between the child and Ms. Miller. To sever that bond would be unconscionably cruel and psychologically detrimental to a child who has already endured immense trauma. She looked from me to Edward. Therefore, I am ordering a structured transition plan. Ms. Miller is to be granted permanent and regular visitation rights. She will remain a constant fixture in this child's life, subject to the guidance of a child psychologist. Mr. Croft, if you truly want your son to heal, you are going to need the woman who helped him survive. Edward stood up slowly. He looked at me across the aisle, the anger and suspicion finally gone, replaced by a look of humility. I understand, Your Honor, he said softly. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. I sank into my chair, gasping for breath. I hadn't lost him. I hadn't lost him. A side door opened and a social worker led Julian into the courtroom. He looked so small in his new, clean clothes. He scanned the room, his eyes wide and nervous. Then he saw me. Ava! He shouted. He broke free from the social worker and ran. He ran across the courtroom, and I fell to my knees just in time to catch him. We hugged right there on the floor, clinging to each other. He smelled of nice shampoo now, but he felt just the same. Did we win? He whispered into my ear. Yes, baby, I cried. We won! A shadow fell over us. I looked up to see Edward Croft standing there, looking down at us. Dad, Julian said, taking my hand and holding it tight. Don't be mad at Ava. Edward crouched down, bringing himself to our level. I'm not mad, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, painful regret. I thought you were just another person trying to use him. I just loved him, was all I could say. Edward extended his hand to me. Thank you, he said, his voice cracking. Thank you for saving my son, and for being the mother he needed when I couldn't be there. I took his hand. It was warm and strong. So, Julian said, looking from his dad's face to mine, I still get to see you? Edward Croft smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his tired face. Yes, Julian, you still get to see her. All the time. 6 months later, I pulled my car into the long, winding driveway of the Croft estate. It was a new car, a practical sedan, paid for with my own money. I wasn't homeless anymore. I had a small, sunny apartment downtown, and I had a job. After the trial, Edward hadn't just given me visitation rights. He'd given me a new life. He hired me to work at the Croft Foundation, putting me in charge of a brand new initiative dedicated to helping at-risk youth and families in crisis. I was using my own painful experiences to help people who were in the same position I had been in. It was the most fulfilling work I could ever imagine. I walked up to the massive front doors. I didn't need to ring the bell anymore. The security guard at the gate had waved me through with a friendly smile. "Afternoon, Ms. Miller." "Hi, Robert," I said to the driver, who was polishing the town car. I walked into the grand foyer, which was now filled with sunlight. "Ava!" The shout echoed from the top of the sweeping staircase. Julian came barreling down the steps, looking healthy and happy. His cheeks were full, the dark circles under his eyes had vanished, and he was dressed in a soccer uniform. He practically tackled me with a hug. "Did you see my game?" he asked breathlessly. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," I said, ruffling his hair. "You scored 2 goals." "3, he corrected proudly. Edward emerged from his home office, a coffee mug in his hand. He looked like a different person, relaxed, the deep lines of grief on his face softened. "He's been watching for you out the window for the last hour," Edward said with a laugh. "Hey, Edward," I said. "Hello, Ava. Staying for dinner? The cook made your favorite lasagna. I'd love that." We all sat around the enormous dining table. It was no longer a silent, cavernous space. It was filled with noise and laughter as Julian chattered on about school and his team and a new video game he was hoping to get. Edward hung on his every word, soaking it all in. I looked at them both and thought about my own parents, still in their perfect house, who had slammed the door in my face. I hadn't spoken to them since that night. I didn't need to. I once thought I had lost my entire family, that everything I valued had been stripped away. But as I watched Julian laugh with a smudge of tomato sauce on his chin and saw Edward smiling at his son with pure love, I knew the truth. Family isn't about blood. It's not about a shared last name. Family are the ones who open the door for you when you're standing in the rain. They're the ones who sit with you in the dark until the sun comes up. After dinner, we all piled onto the couch to watch a movie. Julian snuggled into the space between Edward and me, resting his head on my shoulder as the opening credits rolled. The room was quiet, warm, and safe. "Ava?" Julian whispered after a while. "Yeah, buddy? You're my other mom," he said simply. A lump formed in my throat. I leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "And you're my boy," I whispered back. "Always." I closed my eyes, breathing in the moment. I was safe, I was loved, and for the first time in a very long time, I was finally home.